Hello and welcome again to Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe, and we have another innovator interview. But first, let's talk a little about food because, we're used to having produce flown in year-round from the southern hemisphere, from equatorial regions. So we're used to having various greens, berries, peppers, other things at any time of the year in our grocery stores. However, that's not sustainable. The flights moving that food into the local market is tremendously carbon emitting, and we want to try to cut that down. And what I think we're looking at is a moment in history that's very similar to when Norman Borlaug invented dwarf wheat back in the 1960s. It led to a green revolution that allowed us to feed more than 1 billion additional people, brought all of those people out of extreme hunger into a form of food security, which we've continued to improve. And now, as we look at the redistribution of our food supply, we're going to bring more of it back into urban or suburban areas where it can be grown right where people need and consume it. And in fact, you can point to the example of Whole Foods in London, which this week announced that they're going to actually have an indoor farm for lettuce and other greens that customers will be able to buy from, seed grown, and purchase right there. And what we wanted to do is talk about urban farming. So we invited Eddy Badrina, who's the CEO of Eden Green. You can find it at edengreen.com. He was brought on board by the founders, Jacques and Eugene Van Buren, who were agronomists. They created a 1-acre research and development indoor farm in Claiborne, Texas, and now they're at the beginning of launching their first commercial farm. They intend to license this technology to urban farmers all over the world. Their mission is to help the world grow locally and end food security. And so, Eddy, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Mitch, thanks so much for having me. Great. Great to be on the show. And it's a lovely day here in Dallas.
Well, good. It's a lovely day in the Seattle area. It's getting cold. We're getting ready for winter, but of course we'll have plenty of food. But that's why we wanted to talk to you. Eden Green is fascinating. So let's just start talking about the challenge of feeding everybody. Why is urban farming becoming an essential component of the world's food supply?
So that's a great question. Even as you talk about the weather, what we're seeing is a couple of problems. One is people want food year-round. They want certain types of food year-round. Mm-hmm. Good luck telling my wife that she can't have strawberries 12 months out of the year, or my kids. It's just what consumers demand now. And then you combine that with just your normal seasonal weather patterns. Like you said, it's getting cold up there in Seattle, and it's getting cool down here as well. It's in the 40s here. You can't grow vegetables year-round in those types of conditions in your traditional farming space. And so what you get is this seasonality, which is normal and natural, but it's bumped up against consumer demand. So the current solution is to ship it from all over the world, like you said. The problem therein is in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter so much pre-COVID. We were able to paper things over and the consumer really didn't notice. But post-COVID, it's really accelerated this trend, just like it has every trend across industries. But in the food industry, it's accelerated this trend of supply chain fragility. Mm-hmm. So what we saw, not just produce, but everything else, it is really being bottlenecked in a couple of different points in the food supply chain. So, as we're only going to get more volatile weather patterns. I don't think this is the last pandemic that we'll see, just because of globalism and how we travel and just the changing nature of society. And we're only going to grow as a population, as a global population. So that's going to increase our, 1, consumption, 2, demand, and then 3, bottleneck of supply chain. All 3 of those make for a really, really bad formula for food insecurity. And so that's where we want to step in. That's where we have a solution to step in, which is controlled environment agriculture. And specifically ours is a combination of the best of both worlds, which is using a controlled environment like a greenhouse, as well as with vertical farming that can provide density, and then finally using 100% sunlight with some complementary grow lights, but really we use sunlight more than anything else. So that allows us to grow consistent, fresh greens at a scale that has been, up until this point, unimaginable. And so you talk about just the benefits that has. In 1.5 acres of our greenhouse, you can grow 900,000 pounds of leafy greens. That's anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million salads.
And that's year round. So that's many
year round. Right. So we turn 11 to 13 harvests a year, and that's just the turn. But with a greenhouse that big, every row, there's some zone that's being harvested every day and every week. Mm-hmm. So you're getting this continual, perpetual harvest coming out of these greenhouses. And because it's 1.5 acres, it can be located right next to you. Like, it can be located in an urban setting or even a suburban setting next to, strategic distribution points. And so you're cutting down on the logistics of delivering these greens from the greenhouse to the market or direct to consumer.
So now you have a kind of a platform or infrastructure, but it's the setup for the farm. And you get people started with the indoor farm. They can grow leafy vegetables, herbs, peppers, and berries, cannabis too. They can do it in urban settings wherever there's a large building. What's included in that infrastructure?
So what's included is 3 things. So one is the greenhouse itself, right, which is obviously made of poly and translucent material that allows the sunlight to come in. The second is the mechanical engineering and plumbing. So all of that we've actually made it so efficient and just ready to be shipped that we actually just put them in shipping cargo containers and then can ship them over to anywhere in the world to then be assembled. And then the last piece is probably the most important, which is our patented tower system, which is 18 feet tall. And we have rows and rows of those, and we'll set them up. We'll build the greenhouse. We'll hire, train, and staff up the greenhouse managers and the local labor, and then we'll license that technology. So you put all of those together, and what you get is a really, really dense greenhouse that's able to produce, and you're able to harvest just an unbelievable amount of leafy greens, like you said, or herbs or peppers or certain types of berries.
So let's talk about the yield per acre of indoor land versus traditional outdoor farming. And I want to emphasize to begin with that you're not trying to replace outdoor farming. You're simply augmenting it. So how do they compare in terms of yield?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on something really, really important, which is we're not out to replace farmers. We're not a silver bullet when it comes to food supply. We are trying to cover one aspect of food supply and of some basic foodstuffs like kale, arugula, spinach, lettuce, those things that can be grown, in a greenhouse setting and at scale, as well as herbs and peppers and certain berries like strawberries. But we can't grow corn. We can't grow rice, commercially viable, right? Wheat, those things, we believe that the farmers are actually, I really do think farmers are some of the most hardest working individuals in our society, and they don't get a lot of credit for what they do. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring best practices to that part of the food supply chain that we think we can do better than almost anyone else.
How does an acre of your land compare to growing the same crops outside?
Yeah, it's really quite astounding. So 1.5 acres of our greenhouse can produce as much as 33 traditional farming acres of leafy greens. And you think about the land mass that it takes to do that. Well, then you also have to consider water. You have to consider the energy to plant and harvest. And so with water consumption, 33 farming acres to produce that amount of produce would require around 862,000 gallons of water a year. Our acre and a half greenhouse for that same amount of produce only consumes 90,000 gallons of water a year. And then to put that into perspective, an average American household, my household, consumes 45,000 gallons of water a year. So it's really not much more water consumption than 2 average American households to produce all of that harvest.
And of course, by keeping the food closer to the consumer, you're lowering the CO2 cost of moving it to them and having the infrastructure that supports all of that transportation.
Absolutely. The carbon footprint, when you combine that savings in logistics, especially if the greenhouse is located next to a distribution center or is located smack dab in the middle of a community that can partake of those greens, and combined with what we're using inside the greenhouse, the carbon footprint is near close to zero.
So now you're growing hydroponically and using the recycled water to achieve that incredible water use rate. Is the food grown by Eden Green organic, or is it dependent on fertilizer?
So we actually think it's better than organic. So with organic, there are a lot of variables in organic farming that you still can't control, like the history of the soil before you got there, the farming land around you that may or may not be organic, the things that they're spraying around you, the things that are in the air, things that are in the rainwater. So we can actually control all that, and our plants get only what we want to give them. So from seed all the way to harvest, we're just controlling every aspect of nutrition, of water, of light, of humidity. And so they are, and even water temperature. So the system is optimized to grow the plants in such a way that that is very, I would call it plant centric, right? We're trying to cater to all of that plant's needs, physical needs, so that it can grow as quickly as possible and it can have the most nutrition as possible.
Now, it's interesting that you chose to use natural sunlight, because one of the criticisms I have read in the past of urban farming is that we would be generating artificial sunlight. Even if it was from solar, there would be a loss of that energy. But you literally tear the roof off of these places in order to do that?
Yeah, so we build greenhouses that just let all the light in, right? There's an opportunity for retrofitted, old retrofitted warehouses or retail spaces. That takes a little bit more of it's a more complex sort of equation for light. But with a greenhouse, what we're able to do is we're solving for the very thing which the whole reason controlled environment agriculture exists is because they couldn't solve for the variability of light from summer to winter and whatnot. And then these plants need a certain, I'll call it formula or recipe of light to grow optimally. And so people just have not been able to control that in the past and do it at scale. We've figured that out. And so we're able to use sunlight. But what that does in return is it cuts down on our electricity and our energy costs, so much so that we're on the scale of, we use 10 to 20% of what normal controlled environment agriculture uses in terms of electricity costs, because we don't need all of that electricity. They have to run those lights 24/7 to produce that artificial sunlight. We only need to run the lights when it's a cloudy day, or when during the winter the sun may be angled differently, but we really don't have to use those lights all the time. In fact, it's not great for the plants to have those lights all the time. They need some rest.
Right. So let's talk about the produce itself. How are people going to be able to identify something that was grown by an Eden Green farm at retail?
So, we're in the business of selling the technology platform to to either retailers, wholesalers, nonprofits, nation states, regional authorities that want to use it for their own production. So the ideal would be that on a bag that's a private label, a store private label, say at a Walmart or an Albertsons or any of that, or even a distributor, that they would have their own labels, but really on the small corner of it would say powered by Eden Green. We believe that much like an Intel Inside type model, we believe that we are really, really good at the technology to power production and growing produce. We're not really interested in being the retail sales arm of that. We will leave that to the experts in the consumer packaged goods space to market that. But we want to be the thing that powers all of that produce.
And the other thing that occurs to me is that we're not simply talking about going to buy something anymore. This could be, because it's right in the middle of a community, the basis for a distribution model completely different than going shopping. We could have home delivery on a regular basis of literally just picked vegetables. How does this change? Today, we define locally grown to mean roughly 400 miles from wherever you are when it's called locally grown. How do you think that changes with the advent of urban farming?
So, that definition of locally grown is very technical, and it's not consumer centric. We define it as 400 mile radius. The consumer right now really defines locally grown as qualitative. It's let me go to my farmer's market on a Saturday morning and walk around with the kids and maybe get something that's in season that looks good. Maybe I'll put that in my, my stew or my soup or my salad. But it's not a consistent supply of everyday food. And so pre-COVID, that's what locally grown meant. I think post-COVID, we at Eden Green are really trying to redefine what locally grown means. And there are three aspects that I think are worth redefining. One is accessibility. If it's locally grown and it's grown, say 4 miles from you, and maybe there's a co-op, a CSA that's next door and that's selling those greens straight out of that greenhouse, that is really, really accessible to almost anyone. And I think that's key because one, we as a society have the freshest, most nutritious produce go to the people who can afford it the most. Right. The folks who need it the most, rather, they don't have access to that. So if we can provide that, one, by being in their community, and two, by having it just be readily available, man, that solves a whole different part of our societal needs that has not been well addressed up to this point. So accessibility is the first redefinition. I think the second one is consistency. Just like we talked about before, being able to get lettuce, spinach, arugula, kale, and then even, specialty items like pak choi that are very, very popular among the Asian American subset. That they are not able to get that unless they ship it over from, tens of, probably 5,000 miles away. That can all of a sudden be accessible because you can grow those once international type varieties regionally or even locally. So and you can do it agnostically to seasons. Mm-hmm. So there's a consistency of getting it year round that I think is very key in addition to being accessible. And then the last piece is safety. With COVID, we've seen a rise actually in salmonella and E. coli outbreaks, and then some plant virus outbreaks. We're going through it right now. If you go to Chick-fil-A,
regulations were relaxed just to get through this.
Yeah. If you go to Chick-fil-A or Wendy's right now, you'll see they have a shortage of lettuce. Now, granted, it's iceberg lettuce, which has little to no nutritional value, but nonetheless, it's lettuce. And the shortage is due to, one, it's due to weather, seasonal patterns of weather. It's warmer than usual in the Salinas Valley, and so the lettuce isn't growing as well. But right. Two, there's a plant virus there, again, from being out of doors. that safety, there's a lot of cutting corners when it gets to getting that amount of produce that people need through a bottleneck supply chain, and then into the hands of the consumers. There's more volume, but then there's more risk. People are cutting corners on harvesting, on processing, on packing, on the time that it stays in the supply chain, and then the time that it stays on the shelf before someone buys it. So if you have a local source of produce, man, you're able to bypass all of that. And that's why we know it's a disruptor to the entire industry, because it affects every single part of that value chain, but it affects it for the better.
It's interesting because what you're describing is an environment where I could set up a farm to do a specialized type of growing, and possibly with a little larger geographic footprint for my customer base. But, if I focused on Asian leafy vegetables and served all the restaurants and grocers in the Seattle area, for instance, where I'm located, that's a very viable business. And even at the 2 million salads a year level, there's a lot of money to be made providing those specialty experiences and supporting the continued expansion or diversity of the cuisines available to people. Now, thinking about that and thinking about the people who can't necessarily afford their food today, how do you see these farms playing a role in community investment for locally grown produce and as a job creation opportunity?
So I think there's two things. One is, I think as more of these greenhouses are grown, are built, we really want to establish a network of folks who own and operate these greenhouses, and in that network you can have specialization, right? So even if it's pak choi in Seattle, the reality is pak choi in Seattle delivered to Houston or to Dallas is way fresher, right? It's way fresher and it's way more accessible than pak choi flown in from Taiwan or China, right? So there's a huge opportunity for specialization within this sort of network, this mesh network of greenhouses. When it comes to hyper local impact, I would say the biggest one is job creation. So because we are so efficient in our capital expenditure as well as our operating expenses of a greenhouse, because we use less electricity than almost anyone else, what that allows us to do then is to have a lever to pull on how much you want to use manual labor and use a local labor force instead of automation.
So how many people work in a typical 1.5 acre farm first?
So a typical 1.5 acre farm employs up to 30 people, 30 full-time jobs with health and benefits at a living day's wage, not minimum wage, and in such a way that it's not transitory anymore. There's no migrant workers. They're full-time jobs because, again, we're planting and harvesting every single day. So that, from an impact perspective, if you can then take the whole picture of it, you've got an 1.5 acre greenhouse in the middle of what's a typical urban community up there in Seattle? What's it called? What's the neighborhood?
The Hilltop neighborhood in Tacoma, which is a very stressed community.
Okay, so imagine an 1.5 acre in the Hilltop community of Tacoma. And in that, it's placed right in the major thoroughways, the main streets, because that's where, trucks will come through and pick up the produce from. So it's located right there, probably, anywhere from 3 to 6 miles from where people are living, right? So then they're walking to that, and they're working in not just a dead-end job, but an industry that is only going to grow by leaps and bounds in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm seeing anywhere from estimates anywhere from $25 to $50 billion industry, but in a decade or two. So all of a sudden, you've got folks who are living and working in their community They don't have to move from where they are. And this thing is an economic engine where it's providing a tax base, right? And then maybe you have a CSA, a local co-op there that's selling subsidized produce to folks in that neighborhood or folks in a 3-mile radius. My vision is actually for a co-op to be put up, just a small little co-op put up right next door to each of the greenhouses that we sell. Mm-hmm. And for everyone, they pass out little scan cards, little barcodes to a mile or 2 or 3-mile radius. Anyone with that barcode can walk into that co-op and get a pound of greens for, call it $1, right? Yep. All of a sudden, and that is a rounding error. If you include all of those folks getting a pound of greens, that's a rounding error to the overall volume of produce that's coming out of that greenhouse. But they can donate that. Whoever owns that greenhouse can actually donate it to a 501c3 that's running that co-op, right? So all of a sudden you are employing folks there, you're giving back to the community, and then you also can probably develop a workforce development program out of that co-op. So then you're training up the next level of folks who want to come work there. And by the way, once they work there for 2 or 3 years, the world is their oyster when it comes to working at another greenhouse. Again,
sure, they're qualified professionals at that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it really is. We believe it's not just a greenhouse that's growing an immense amount of produce. We really think it's a community changing platform.
So, do you see this as an opportunity for public-private partnerships to set up the future of CSAs? And is one way to put it, but another would be to supplement local food supplies, create food resilience,
sure,
in addition to economic development.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually one of our target audiences when we're talking to folks who can actually build one of these. Think of a philanthropy, think of a nonprofit that, historically has given to a local food bank. And if you told them, hey, for this investment, you can actually build a greenhouse that if you sell things at a subsidized rate, the greenhouse will actually break even. So you wouldn't have to spend another dime on that greenhouse. It'll be self-sustaining, and it will be throwing off produce that you're both, one, subsidizing to the local community, and then two, selling the rest with a brand or with a label that they know is locally grown and is grown by the local community. I think that's a very, very compelling proposition and vision for a philanthropic organization or a family office or a nonprofit. That vision to cast for them of, hey, this is a self-sustainable engine that's going to benefit the community around them. I have a hard time, especially in this. I'm on the board of a couple of nonprofits, and the word of the day is sustainability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Economic sustainability. Right. And here's this greenhouse that can be economically sustainable. It's environmentally sustainable, and it's also sustainable to the community.
So here's the question that I think a lot of folks have about the notion of urban farming and organic food generally, is that it's more expensive. Everybody jokes about Whole Foods being called whole paycheck.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you envision people both being able to eat better and less expensively if this urban farming vision is realized?
I think we do. So there are a couple of trends that we're seeing. One is a growth in the population. The second is this demand that you see, this year-round demand. But then you're also seeing the volume of produce and greens, of nutritious produce and greens, staying relatively level. So if you've got demand rising, but you've got supply changing or staying the same or even being more volatile thanks to the supply chain, you're going to see an increase in prices. We're already seeing an increase in prices in groceries just due to COVID, right? More
Sure.
People are eating at home, and I think that'll remain the case. So if the only way to combat that increase in price is to raise the supply and or to make the supply chain more consistent. So I think that's where this comes in. I really do believe that these greenhouses are actually going to help people eat more nutritiously, consistently at the same rate, if not less than what they're paying right now for inferior product.
And perhaps someday Chick-fil-A will have bok choy on their chicken sandwiches.
You know, there's mixed salads. So that's probably another trend too, is a lot of these sandwich places, a lot of these quick serve restaurants, they're having to stock more salads because people are demanding more greens as well as the non-meat type protein, right? So the demand for produce is just going to go up and up and up, even if you don't think it, even if it's not a salad, it's the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Foods. So that's just going to mean a rise in the price of overall produce. So I think, the Chick-fil-A's and the Wendy's of the world, and even the Domino's and the Papa John's, they're going to get more into salads because that's what the consumer wants.
So how do people who want to start an urban farm get in touch with you, and what do they need to be prepared to lay out to get started?
So, to get in touch with us, it's as easy as filling out a form fill at edengreen.com. That's EDEN green.com, like the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. And we'll get back to you pretty quickly. I come from a sales and marketing background, and we really pride ourselves on responsiveness to emails and form fills. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of us. But in terms of prep, we'll help you walk through the financial needs, the land needs, and really the offtake needs. I think if someone wants to do this, they have to identify two things: inputs and outputs, right? What's the input? What's the cost for a greenhouse? And we get into that after going through just like an initial call and helping them figure out if it's really something they want to do, because the cost is there's a capital outlay that is proportional to obviously the amount of greens that you're producing. Sure. But then the other piece is outputs. You have 800,000 to 900,000 pounds of leafy greens. Who's going to buy all that? Do you have a what we call offtake partners or offtake contracts in place, or do you have a lot of interest in it, or are you still trying to figure out who you're going to sell it to? So those are things to consider as well.
How does the cost of employing people scale as you add more acreage? Is it linear, or does it? Do you get?
So you definitely capture economies of scale when you grow from an acre and a half to 2 modules, which would be 3 acres and upwards. So for instance, an acre and a half greenhouse employs 30 people. One of those people is a greenhouse manager. Another one is a food safety director. Another one is a director of horticulture. As you scale to 2 greenhouses, you still only need one of those positions. Right. 3 greenhouses, really, you only need one of those positions. After the 3rd greenhouse, you probably want to hire another greenhouse manager, and you want to hire some supplemental folks. But so anyway, it scales up, but not linearly. There's economies of scale that take place as you build up.
And it sounds like the good-paying jobs doing the actual day-to-day work scaled roughly linearly. But, of course, from the perspective of job creation, that's a benefit.
That is a benefit. Yeah, absolutely. We have found customers who want to automate it for various reasons, right? So that means your capital expense on the front end will be higher to buy and maintain all of those automation equipment. But then your operating expenses would go down thusly. So it's really, again, we have that flexibility because the other economic parts of our greenhouse are such that you can pull those levers, whereas a lot of other people can't, just because the CapEx is too high or the OpEx is too high, that they have to go automation, and they can't have that community benefit of employing all those people. So now I will say you can actually go in the opposite direction as well. We are developing and starting to introduce some smaller, what we call skids. And those modules are around 3,400 square feet. So much, much smaller. Now, they're not economically sustainable. They're ideal, one or two or three modules are ideal for a small nonprofit that wants to make it's a sizable investment, but then they're committed to subsidizing all or some or all of that cost on an annual basis to just feed people around them. And that from a value proposition perspective is still very, very compelling, but the value is just different, right? You're talking about, hey, I've got to put in, X amount of dollars a year to feed thousands and thousands of people. Then that equation is different. But it's available. Those smaller skids are available if people are interested in them.
Well, Eddie, this is a fascinating story, and I'd love to have you come back and talk to us about how it continues to evolve.
Absolutely. I'd love to. I'd love to keep you guys up to date. I know your audience is so keen on technology and on movements like us that can make communities more sustainable and make the environment more sustainable, our practices in the environment more sustainable. So anxious to and excited to keep you and your audience up to date as we grow.
Well, thank you. Folks, that's Eddy Badrina. He's the CEO of Eden Green, and you can find that at edengreen.com. Check out urban farming and think about what you could do in your community. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and take care of the planet.